Larry, welcome here, my dear friend. Welcome back from your trip. We have a lot to talk about: the EU elections, the coming French elections, the UK elections, the problems with the government in Israel. But everybody wants to know about your trip, and certainly I do. I deeply regret that I wasn't with you, but those were circumstances beyond my control. Tell us first your impression of the Russian people and the commercial activity and St. Petersburg as a city that you viewed in the week you were there.
It's just magnificent. People, city, everything. You know, what's interesting is that over the weekend, the World Bank finally confirmed that Russia's the fourth largest economy in the world, measured in terms of gross domestic product, and with what they call purchasing power parity. And I just read an email this morning from an acquaintance who has said, "Oh, Russia is terrible. I was there a few years ago. Those people don't have the kind of standard of living in the United States that we do." And you know what? He's right. Because in Russia and St. Petersburg, a woman can walk the streets at 11:30 at night and not have to worry about being raped or mugged. You can get on the subways there and you're not chasing off rats. You can go to stores and they got every item you can imagine available for purchase, but you're paying, probably 40% less than you would in the United States. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's ridiculous. Some of the stupid perceptions in the West and our arrogance. Because it used to be true. You could go to Moscow or St. Petersburg and the shelves were bare and people were not able to buy. That's no longer the case. It's a thriving, vibrant economy. But best of all are the people. And this is what really, I think, sort of sets them apart. It is like they're like the folks in the Midwest where I grew up. They're very welcoming. That they separate. They don't judge you because you're an American. That you got Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell as your representatives. They judge you by you as an American. They ignore the government. And I found that same thing from a German TV guy who was doing an interview with me, and he was 33, 34. He said he was alarmed when he first got there. He was afraid that, because he's German, given the history of Germany and Russia going back to World War II, and then recent comments by German politicians. And he said he was just blown away by how welcoming and kind and generous the Russian people were. So I'm not trying to suggest that there are not some problems and they don't have some social issues in Russia. But I tell you what, people, if given a choice between living in New York City or living in Moscow, they take Moscow hands down every time.
Before we get into specific issues, we have a clip from your least favorite former admiral who does his Baghdad Bob imitations.
Yeah.
Press room of the White House. You won't believe what Admiral Kirby had to say about Russia and Russians.
We have evolved our support to Ukraine as the war has evolved. The needs of the Ukrainians on the battlefield have changed, and they are still changing. And we are trying to stay apace with that. That's why we're in constant conversations with them. I would also, want to remind people that everything Ukraine is getting is in concert with them and meeting their needs, their asks, and we're trying to, again, stay apace of that. But I think it's also the last thing I'll say, and then I promise I'll end the answer is take a look at what Russia has suffered. And the president alluded to some of this in his speech. More than 350,000 casualties, a million young people leaving the country because they don't want to be there anymore. An economy that's basically a war economy and not doing that well. Russia has suffered a lot at the hands of Ukraine. And because...
Does he know what the hell he's talking about?
No, he's a moron. I mean, he's back to his Baghdad Bob. The Russian people, and I had a conversation with one fellow who actually he'd been in the military, and it was out now, and he said he has some American friends of all things because he grew up in Texas for a bit in his life, and he pointed out, he says, look, these claims about us suffering all of these casualties, he goes, it's not on social media. And he said, as you can see, because I mean, every Russians, they got a phone. They're doing social media like Americans and Canadians and Europeans. He said, you can't hide it. Social media is ubiquitous. People are out there with cameras. They would be taking pictures of the graveyards, of the freshly dug graves, of all the people who have been, maimed, supposedly. Yes, Russia has suffered some casualties, but the general staff, the Stavka, that's running the operation, has been very careful to ensure that the Russian troops are not thrown into meat grinder operations. Instead, they are the meat grinder. They're delivering it. So, Kirby is a typical example of what I call the narcissistic personality disorder that afflicts America. We keep looking in the mirror and telling ourselves, man, you're so good looking, you're so strong, and we're a big fat slob. That's what we are. And yet we refuse to see what the rest of the world is.
While you were flying, I think your trip was 28 hours long. While you were flying home, Jake Sullivan, the president's national security advisor, with a beautiful vista of the Eiffel Tower behind him from a rooftop in Paris, was boasting about how much common sense it makes for President Biden to have authorized Ukrainians to use American weapons to attack inside Russia. He wants them limited to Russian military facilities. Lindsey Graham was saying, no surprise, that we should be able to attack anything and everything, anywhere inside Russia. Question for you, and I'm not going to play Graham because you'll lose your breakfast, but I am going to play Sullivan. Question for you. Do you think the American government takes seriously the likely and probable consequences of authorizing the use of American weaponry to attack inside Russia?
No, that's the problem. They have decided that the Russia's just an empty suit, making idle threats. That Putin's soft and not competent. Boy, when you make those kinds of stupid assumptions, you put your country in peril. And that's exactly what Biden and his crew of incompetents are doing. They're putting America in peril because Russia can hurt us bad, and there's nothing we can do to stop it if we cross those red lines.
Here's Jake Sullivan, Larry, yesterday from a rooftop in Paris, cut number 4.
From the president's perspective, this was common sense. What was happening up around Kharkiv, which was new just in the last couple of months, was a Russian offensive where they were moving from one side of the border directly to the other side of the border, and it simply didn't make sense not to allow the Ukrainians to fire across that border to hit Russian guns and emplacements that were firing at the Ukrainians. So the president authorized that. The Ukrainians have carried out that authorization on the battlefield. And one thing I will point out is that the momentum of that operation in Kharkiv has stalled out. Now, Kharkiv is still under threat, but the Russians have not been able to make material progress on the ground in recent days in that area. And the United States will continue to support Ukraine in holding the line and pushing back against the aggressing Russian forces.
He knows what he's talking about. What military benefit is there to the use of American military equipment to attack Russian early warning systems, early warning of nuclear weapons?
Yeah, well, one of your viewers just in the comments described it aptly. Liar. He's a liar across the board. Number one, Ukraine has been firing weapons into Belgorod for more than a year, and they're not targeting military personnel. They're not targeting bases or equipment. They're killing civilians. They're hitting cafes. They're hitting theaters. They're hitting stores. They're hitting schools. They're hitting playgrounds. They're killing civilians. They're not killing soldiers. quite a contrast to what the Russians are doing. They're killing soldiers. They're destroying military installations. So, he's wrong on that. This wishful thinking that, the Russians have stalled out around Kharkiv. Hey, they're not taking Kharkiv. What they're doing is isolating it, and they are certainly taking the territory that surrounds it, because they have compelled the Ukrainians to have to redeploy units that were operating down in Donetsk up north. So now the Ukrainian resources are stretched thin, and in the process of that, the casualties that the Ukrainians are suffering, particularly up around Kharkiv, are enormous. It is almost doubled from what it was 3-4 months ago.
Let's take a step back from the actual conflict in Ukraine and tell us a little bit more about St. Petersburg. Tell us about the St. Petersburg Economic Conference and who you heard and what you gathered about BRICS, about Russian economy, about Russian self-confidence.
The West has, and I'm talking about the leaders in the West are in denial. This conference attracted people from 136 different countries. It was one of the most amazing, conferences, displays I've ever seen. It is this expo center that sits on the outskirts of St. Petersburg it's by the airport. It sits up on a hill. So you have this panorama, this vista of Ukraine, the city, which is located to the northeast from that perspective. Banks, corporations of different kinds selling different products, everything from one of the most sophisticated watchmakers in the world to robots to AI to then also the discussions about what the future of BRICS means. And what the West is in denial about is that up until about 5 years